The wind pushed across the prairie like a memory it couldn't quite forget. Dry grass whispered secrets as it bent beneath the breath of a sun slipping toward the horizon, gold spilling like oil across the dirt. And there she was, tied to a cottonwood tree with rusted iron and blood on her lip, her wedding dress hanging from her like regret. The silk had torn at the hem and the bodice gaped at one shoulder, exposing bruises shaped like fingers. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just stared out across the open land with the glassy stillness of someone who had waited too long to be saved. Cassidy Holt rode up slow, the hooves of his mare muffled by dust. He might have kept going if not for the dog, an old thing, patchy and loyal, sitting beside her like a ghost who'd stayed behind. The outlaw's horse stopped before he said a word. Something in the way the woman breathed, shallow and stubborn, made him dismount. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask who chained her or why. The marks on her wrists said enough. The sun had baked her half into a fever, and the flies had started to gather. He pulled his knife, careful not to touch her, and with a sharp, angry twist, the chain fell away. She didn't move. Her legs were too stiff, her pride too tangled. Cass took off his coat and wrapped it around her, lifting her like she was carved from glass. She was cold, even in the heat, and her cheek rested against his collarbone like a whisper she hadn't meant to speak. He didn't take her into town. That wasn't a place for healing. Instead, he rode with her cradled in his arms, miles out to a broken trapper's cabin where the roof leaned west and the door hung by one hinge. He laid her on the cot, found a pail for water, and boiled broth while the dog circled 3 times and curled up in the corner. For 3 days she said nothing, ate little, slept in fit. Her eyes, pale as ash bark, followed his every move with quiet suspicion. When he came close, she stiffened. When he left the room, she listened harder. The 4th night, she spoke. "You're not going to touch me?" Cass looked up from the fire. "No, ma'am." "You want something, though. Men like you always do." He didn't smile. "Already got it. You're alive." She scoffed, but her shoulders fell a fraction. That night she slept longer. Her dreams were full of kicks and shouts, but she stopped waking up screaming. Cass didn't press her. He repaired the window shutters, chopped firewood, and fed her broth laced with herbs. At night, he sat beside the fire with the dog, telling stories the way you might to a gravestone, slow and quiet just to fill the space. Emmeline listened through the wall, fingers curled under the quilt, wondering what kind of man gave without demand. The town of Dustwell was 20 miles east, and it hadn't forgotten her. Not her name, exactly, but her shame. Annabeth Briggs had been the one with honey curls and soft eyes, the girl who answered the mail order ad from Beau Talbot, the biggest landowner for 50 miles. But when it came time to board the train, Annabeth fled with a gambler. Left Emmeline to bear her name, wear her dress, marry her fate. Emmeline hadn't cried when the train pulled into Dustwell. She'd held her chin high, like Daddy taught her. Beau Talbot had met her with garlic breath and a hand that lingered too long on her hip. That night, when he found out the truth, the switch, the lie, he'd beaten her. Said she'd humiliated him. Said the town would think he was a fool. So he chained her to the cottonwood on the edge of his land and left her there for God and buzzards to judge. It was that judgment that burned hotter than the sun. Not the bruises, not the blood, but the knowing how people would talk. How Miss Lorna at the seamstress would wag her tongue and Sheriff Kilgore would look the other way, same as he always did when men like Talbot got their way. On the 6th morning, Emmeline stood barefoot in the dirt outside the cabin. Her long hair blew in the wind, tangled and wild. She held a knife Cass had left on the table. For a moment, he thought she meant to end it. Instead, she cut her hair clean at the neck. Let the strands fall like dead promises. Then she tossed the wedding dress into the fire. Watched it blacken and curl without blinking. Cass didn't speak. Just watched her with the reverence of a man witnessing resurrection. "I won't be a ghost," she said. "I won't be someone else's sin." He nodded. "Then don't." That afternoon, she helped mend the shutters. She boiled her own broth. She spoke more, even if her voice trembled. Told him about Annabeth and the banker's threat. About how a good name meant less than a full belly. Cass told her about a woman he lost to typhoid. About riding with a gang that robbed stagecoaches until the blood got too thick and the gold lost its shine. About how he'd once been chained too, though not to a tree. Each story was a step across the space between them. They never touched, but when he handed her the ladle or she passed him a tool, their fingers brushed with meaning. A week later, the sheriff came. Rode up on a pale gelding with a rifle across his back and sweat already soaking his collar. He looked at Emmeline like she was trouble, not a victim. Told Cass he was harboring a woman who belonged to another man. By law, Kilgore said, she's Talbot's bride. His property. Cass didn't reach for his gun. He just stepped forward, slow and steady, the way a man does when his blood is calm but his soul isn't. She ain't property. She's a mail-order bride who broke contract. Cass tilted his head. No. She survived it. Kilgore's lip curled. You plan to die over some girl ain't even yours? Cass looked at Emmeline then. Not with heat or hunger, but with the fierce clarity of a man who sees something sacred in someone else's endurance. She don't belong to anybody, he said. The sheriff spat in the dust, gave a warning about how things worked in Dustwell, then rode off into the dusk. That night Emmeline packed a satchel. I'll leave by morning, she whispered. You don't have to. They'll kill you for helping me. He didn't argue. Just stoked the fire and stared into it for a long, long while. She watched him from the doorway, dress replaced with worn trousers, hair curling awkwardly at the ends. Outside, the wind was rising again. She reached for the latch, but stopped. You ever think you were born for something better? She asked. Cass turned toward her, eyes catching the firelight. No, he said. But I think you were. And behind them, the dog lifted its head and growled, low warning. Someone was coming. The rider came just past midnight, outlined by moonlight and menace. Beau Talbot didn't knock. He never had manners when rage rode him. The horse thudded to a halt outside the cabin, snorting steam, and Talbot's boots hit the earth like falling stones. Emmeline had been sitting by the hearth, her hands curled around a chipped mug, when she heard the dog growl again. Low, certain. Cass stood before she did. He came, she whispered. Cass didn't answer. He reached for the rifle he kept leaned against the wall, but something in him hesitated. He didn't want this to end in blood. Not tonight. The door rattled as a heavy fist struck it. You got something belongs to me, Outlaw. I'm talking her back. Emmeline didn't flinch. She moved to stand beside Cass, fingers trembling but held at her sides like she'd trained them. Her voice was thin but unbroken. I never belonged to you. Talbot laughed, and it was a mean sound, wet and phlegmy. I paid for you. You think pity makes you pure? You think hiding behind a murderer makes you clean. Cass opened the door. The air between them shifted like thunder waiting in the bones. Talbot stood with his chest puffed and a shotgun resting lazy in his arm. He didn't expect Cass to be calm. That unnerved him. You gonna kill me now? Talbot sneered. No, Cass said, stepping just past the threshold. But I'll bury you if you touch her again. Talbot raised the shotgun half an inch. From the shadows, the dog barked once, sharp and fast. Behind Cass, Emmeline stepped into view. She wore her brother's old shirt now, tied at the waist, the wind teasing her short hair. She didn't look like a bride. She looked like something wild and wronged and unafraid to burn. You chained me to a tree, she said. You left me for dead. And no one cared, Talbot growled. They still won't. You walk into town, and all they'll see is a whore in her sister's shoes. Emmeline's breath caught. For a second, her pain made the room hold still. Cass took a step forward, quiet as dusk. Then let's give them a new story. That was how they came to ride into Dustwell at dawn. The townsfolk stirred from slumber to find them there, Emmeline walking beside Cass's horse, dust in her boots, dog at her heels. Cass sat tall in the saddle, rifle on his back, hat tilted low. The sun spilled across their path, and the silence was heavy with judgment. Lorna May was the first to speak, her voice slicing through the hush like parlor scissors. "Well, I never." Whispers followed them to the general store, to the churchyard, to the schoolhouse steps where they paused to rest. Emmeline looked at it all, not with defiance but with something steadier, the quiet dignity of survival. The sheriff came by noon. His hand hovered near his holster, but he didn't draw. Cass stood with arms crossed, eyes unreadable. "You got no claim on this town," Kilgore said. "Or her." "No," Cass replied. "But we got the truth. That's heavier than claim." Kilgore considered. Then he nodded once and rode off without another word. Talbot didn't come into town. Not yet. But word spread. That he'd lost control. That his bride had risen from the tree. That the outlaw had faced him down without a bullet. That night the sky broke open with thunder. Rain swept through Dustwell like baptism. Cass and Emmeline found shelter in the old blacksmith barn, curled on opposite sides of a haystack. The dog slept between them. She spoke in the dark. "I feel like I'm wearing someone else's skin. Like I left pieces of me under that tree." Cass turned his head toward her voice. "Then let's build you a new name. One no man can take." She didn't answer, but he heard her breath steady. The days passed, slow and deliberate. Cass found work repairing fences. Emmeline helped the schoolteacher read letters. Children loved her. They didn't know about contracts or shame. They knew she laughed when they fell and sang off-key when she thought no one was listening. Still, the town watched. Lorna whispered. The preacher prayed louder on Sundays. And always, somewhere at the edge of it all, Beau Talbot waited. He came one afternoon, when the school let out and Emmeline walked alone toward the well. His boots crunched behind her. She froze. "You took everything from me," he hissed. She turned slowly. "You were owed nothing." His face turned red. "I'll ruin you. I'll drag you through the street like you deserve." She didn't scream. She didn't run. But Cass appeared before she could blink. Not with fists. Not with fury. Just presence. He stepped between them, hand resting at his side. "You raise that hand again," Cass said, "and you best pray the law finds you before I do." Talbot's hand twitched toward his belt. Cass didn't blink. Click. The gun misfired. A dead echo in the silence. Even the birds stopped singing. Talbot stared at the weapon like it had betrayed him. Then the sheriff arrived. Whether by chance or plan, no one knew. He dismounted and looked long at Talbot. Then at Emmeline. "This ends here," Kilgore said. Talbot opened his mouth to speak, but found no words. He turned and left. He never came back to Dustwell. That evening, Emmeline and Cass sat on the chapel porch. The rain had left the wood smelling like old earth and pine. She rested her head against the post. "Thank you," she whispered. Cass shook his head. "You did that." She turned to him. "You think people like us get to start again?" "I don't know," he said. "But I know we can stop runnin' it." In the distance, the schoolchildren planted a cottonwood sapling. The teacher said it would mark a new year, a new season. But Emmeline knew better. It was her tree. The one where shame was buried and something else, braver, gentler, was growing in its place. The old dog barked once, then wagged its tail at the horizon. Cass smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Because on the wind, faint and sour, came the scent of gunpowder. And from the ridge above Dustwell, a shadow stood watching them, motionless, rifle in hand.